Hold on 1 second. We are getting an audio problem. I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Let me try this. Try talking now.
We're
How about
testing
now?
our audio. Hopefully that helps. Oh, got
Okay.
Corinne. Oh, Corinne. Um, are you? Do we have our settings? Are you? Okay.
Okay,
All
they
right.
say they have us all.
We have our little. As you hear me stumble and talk about things I don't know about when it comes to OBS and streaming. Now that you have us all here, let me start that over. Hey, fake entry again, repeating. But thank you again for everyone for being here. Happy Monday. Hope you all had great starts to your week. I know you guys usually hang out here with us as we stream tabletop games, but every once in a while we like to do a little something different and talk to creators and developers and freelancers and all of the awesome projects that they're working on and the hard work that they put into creating the games that we work on. So tonight we're sitting down with Jacqueline Bryk. You may be familiar with her from her very passionate tweets on Twitter. She's at Rufflejacks on Twitter.
That's maybe one of the politest ways my tweets have been described. Thank you.
Hey, you have to be passionate about something, and if you're putting it out there on social media, it's better to want to be remembered for it in a good way, of course, in an impactful way. Um, but Jax is a Onyx Path freelancer. She's worked with White Wolf, and she does a lot of work when it comes to safety mechanics in games. And that's probably not really a term that the majority of tabletop players or even video game or traditional board game players are familiar with. So I'm really excited to dive into that. If you want, can you just tell our viewers maybe a little bit about you? I could, but I want to hear what you're uh, proud of and what you want your legacy to be during this interview.
Oh God, now I'm thinking about legacy. Let's start with a little about me first, and we can think about legacy later. So my name is Jacqueline Bryk. I go by Jax or Jacqueline. Sometimes people have called me Lantern because Jack-o'-lantern. Basically anything but Jackie. That was my racist grandmother, and I don't ever go by that.
That's fair.
So I was born and raised in Delaware. I have dealt with all sorts of fun trauma and stuff that has left me sort of feeling floaty and detached from community because that's what having depression and anxiety and CPTSD will do to you. Um, and a way I started to sort of find connection was through tabletop games and LARPs. But that was always kind of a struggle because, what if somebody wanted to surprise me with something horrible or like present a challenge to my character that involved violating their bodily autonomy in a way I wasn't comfortable with, which has happened to me on more than one occasion. Um, but I was introduced to something called the X card by John Stavropoulos, excuse me, in I believe 2014, 2015. Um, and this blew my mind at the time. And it's just this idea that you can tap out of anything you don't want to engage with no questions asked. And this created sort of a firestorm in my local community because there are people who would be like, well, it dilutes the honesty of the game, and it's not, it makes me feel constrained as a GM, and it doesn't allow me to express my full creativity. And I had problems articulating why I had problems with that. um so it wasn't really until later when I started engaging with other safety tools like the OK check-in, safety signals, um, rewind, script change. We can talk about these a little bit later, but just basically this whole range of opt-in and opt-out safety tools that allow players to sort of modulate their own experience and not be in this unequal power dynamic with a GM or a facilitator or a dungeon master or whatever. And we just really bring people down, really, I'm trying to think of a way to say this, really cause people to be on the same playing field and remember that it's just a game.
Yeah.
Right? And having that safety net for me allows me to go deeper, knowing that other people will respect my boundaries if I put them down, because we've all agreed to these safety tools. And that, for me, as someone with anxiety, is extremely important. And also, in a lot of ways, it causes, people who want to be jerks and hide behind the "it's just a game" thing to be less able to do that. And I think that's great. I actually recently wrote a Twitter thread on this, and you probably saw it, Heather. What the thread was basically boiling it down to people who get mad about safety tools are doing so because of geek social fallacies. Are you familiar with the geek social fallacies?
Not in any detail that I'm confident speaking on.
Okay. Let me pull it up and put it in your chat because it's great.
Yeah.
Excellent article. It's find it on plausiblydeniable.com. Is a list of 5 geek social fallacies. And I will follow you. Hold on. This is followers only chat. Okay, that I can do. I can make that happen.
Oh, in our
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I think maybe we'll look into changing that. I didn't know that was
It's
a
okay.
setting we
It's all
had.
good. So the 5 geek social fallacies, and it's okay if you've had them. I've had them too. Ostracizers are evil. Friends accept me for who I am. Friendship before everything else. Friendship is transitive. And friends do everything together. And the interesting thing for me is when I started reading over these people who were critiquing my social safety rules. I say social rules because that was a Freudian slip, because they really are rules for having a safe social space. But what I was getting is, you are telling me no, you're telling me I can't do something, you are giving people tools for telling me I can't do something. And that ties in to geek social fallacy number 2, which is friends accept me as I am, which in itself is not a toxic statement. But when you take it to the logical extreme of friends accept everything I do and do not ask me to change things or throw down boundaries because that means they are rejecting me, then you have this whole group of men, it's almost always men, who are like, well, even the existence of safety rules threatens me as a GM and a player because it means I can't do things.
And I think therein lies an issue, and
Mhm.
and even taking that a step back when people don't even know that this is something you should be incorporating into your group player settings. Just a very basic example, when I was telling people about this conversation that we're having, I every time I brought it up, I got the question, what are safety rules? What are safety mechanics? And what does that have to do with gaming? And it's a hard conversation to have, especially with people that are so ingrained in their ways and have been doing things and experiencing tabletop games or video games or board games, LARPs, in one way, and then you're trying to introduce this different way of thinking, and trying to encourage them to be more open.
And it's something you see not only with safety mechanics, but just with styles of gaming as well, because people get very set into playing D&D or Powered by the Apocalypse or Boffer LARP or Jeep Form LARP, or any of the hundreds of subgenres. And it can be hard, especially in Western gaming societies, where it's very much about the individual story and how can I shine. to sort of be like, hey, let's all foster this environment together where we can all say yes, but we can all say no as well. Right?
Right.
I'm sorry, I'm a little ADHD rambly because it's late where I am. I guess kind of the best way to explain safety mechanics or safety techniques or whatever you want to call them is sort of setting expectations for consent. Because a lot of Americans, let's be honest, don't know how to say yes or no to something. Because we don't want to be that person. We don't want to look overeager and we don't want to look, negative, right?
Admittedly, I have the same problem. I run it in a lot.
Yep. So do I. Absolutely. And being able to have these social scripts in these games, even optionally, allows us to have a space where we could say, okay, this definitely means yes, and this definitely means no.
Mm.
And then, excuse me, and then you have it codified, and everybody agrees that this is the thing. And it's so much easier when you put it in with the same weight that you give to the game's rules. It's so much easier to say yes or no, because saying yes or saying no or saying, hey, can we rewind that and have this weird rapey fish people be about, hey, actually these fish people steal children to raise them, and it has the same sort of impact, right?
Mm-hmm.
And having that codified as part of the game now means that instead of being like, oh, I don't really want to pressure my DM and I don't want to disappoint the other players, it gives you the agency, just like rolling a die gives you an agency to kill a monster. Using something like script change or the X card or the OK check-in gives you the agency to say, yes, I want more of this, or no, I don't want more of this.
So for those that may not know, and we do employ the X card in our games that we stream here on Roll the Roll or whatever mechanic the players agree to it before the sessions actually start. What does that mean? Can you just like the simplest explanation of it?
Of the X card?
Yeah.
Okay, so the X card is probably the simplest safety mechanic that I know of. And that is, you draw an X on a card or a piece of paper and you put it in the middle of the table. And if something comes up that somebody is uncomfortable with out of character, they tap the X card and the scene changes. They may have to say, hey, this is the specific thing I'm uncomfortable with, but otherwise they are not expected to explain anything.
Okay. And we've actually had that situation come up a few times during our game. It's different when we're streaming. We've had to employ a little bit of a different mechanic, like an X with the hands, or
Right.
again, whatever our players have agreed to. But especially when you're sitting in front of a camera and other people in an audience, it's super important because you don't want to further whatever situation is unfolding and
Right.
whatever uncomfortable feelings are unfolding by not paying attention to that or letting it go too far without taking a pause and stepping back.
Mm-hmm.
So for those that maybe haven't played in a game or are not familiar with a game that employ any type of safety mechanics or maybe nothing that's enforced, where in your opinion is a good place to start? Either as a player, we start with a player and then move to the opposite end of the table as a DM or GM.
Okay, so if you're looking for safety tool resources, there are some really wonderful compendiums on itch. I will link those as I find them, because I know there's safety kit itch. Let's see if I can remember what the hell it's called. I will tweet it once we are finished.
Okay.
Time to look it up.
Yeah, we can
I feel
share
like I
any
should have had
resources
these
you
up.
share them. No, it's okay. We're totally like freeform combo right now. So
Okay. Consent in Gaming by Seamus Reynolds and Shannon Germain is a really wonderful 101 resource. It is super accessible. It mostly comes at it from safety in D20 games. Thank you so much, Ian, for the link to Consent in Gaming. That's a really
Yes, thank
excellent
you.
resource. The Fate Accessibility Kit by Elsa Henry was really wonderful as well. That mostly talks about handling disability in a Fate core game, but it has a lot of really good suggestions for handling marginalized communities in your games. Other games you should look out for safety. Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition. Obviously, I did the safety rules on that one. I'm very proud of those. They have a short overview of each of the tools that I really like and links on where you can find them and discussions of them.
Mm-hmm.
You can also easily find the X card online by just Googling X card RPG. The X card also comes with a really cool counterpart now called the O card, which is if you really like something and you want it to keep going, you tap the O card instead.
I feel like that could be abused easily, just somebody obsessively tapping something, but
I mean, yeah, so can the X card.
true.
The one of the major issues with safety tools is in a lot of ways some detractors are like, well, safety tools can be abused, so we just shouldn't use them anyway because then it gives yet another avenue for people to abuse the rules of the game. And I disagree with that because having a codified culture of consent and communication, I love that alliteration. That was totally unintentional. But building a culture of trust and communication at your table makes it much easier to identify people that you want to play with and also people you don't want to play with. And yes, Ian is right. I did write the safety systems for Changeling Lost 2nd edition. I will also I wrote some stuff for Cult Divinity Lost about playing with sensitive topics. It's less of a safety tools thing and more like, hey, if you want to play a character with addiction, here's what it's like to play a character with addiction. If you want to play a character who is imprisoned, here's what it's like to play a character in a facility, whether that be mental health or, prison or rehab or whatever. So that'll be coming out this year, hopefully, which I'm very excited about.
And I'll be sure to add that into the article that follows this interview so people can be on a lookout for that. But that's super important, and I feel like those specific things and playing a character that have experienced different things than the player has experienced limits what people are comfortable playing, and it maybe influences their interactions with NPCs even, because they can't identify what that is, what it's like, and what it's like to interact with somebody like that, that has had those experiences. I've had players like that at my tables, and I've struggled pointing them in the right direction into resources, and so they're not, what's the word I'm looking for, misappropriating people.
Exploiting.
Yeah. For and just leaning into stereotypes, because that never leads to anything good.
Something I had to do recently with a LARP that I was doing continuity editing on the sheets for. Really wonderful LARP designer Ryan Hart of Sinking Ship Creations ran a game recently called Scapegoat, which was this very cool, like weird cyberpunk Mage the Ascension sort of thing. But one of the things I noticed is, for some reason, his character writers, had all written poor characters as though they were dumpster divers. Like, never once referenced soup kitchens, food pantries, shelters, dealing with finding temporary housing, dealing with Section 8. It was very weird, and it was something I had to bring up to him because I'm like, hey, this game is set in New York City. why aren't you referencing any of the resources that are there and giving these people some basic human dignity and, the intelligence to seek out these resources? Or if they're not seeking out these resources, why aren't you writing about why they're not seeking out these resources? Is it fear of police presence? Is it, fear of being hauled off to jail? Because some of these characters were played by people of marginalized identities,
Mm.
and they wanted to explore that sort of thing. And it was very odd to me that they were just ignoring this whole part of the story. And I think part of it was just that they hadn't done the research and were writing from stereotypes. And it's super easy to just play with stereotypes when you're doing a fantasy game, even like a horror game to some extent. It's super easy to just pull from stereotypes, but after a while that gets boring. And
And
there's
it,
so sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was gonna say, and it limits the development of the game.
Yep. There's just so much you can play with, and unfortunately, in a lot of ways, I think when people aren't thinking or aren't considering the lived experiences of those in their social circle or at their table, it turns into like, and then the homeless bruja comes at you from the shadows, babbling nonsense.
um, I mean, if they have a reason behind it, but
Yeah,
yeah.
but
Especially with a bruja and any type of vampire, they've probably been through some shit.
yeah,
But they still have all of the access to modern resources and modern care,
yeah,
and likely face some of the same troubles that a homeless or a person that's down on their luck in any major city would experience.
absolutely.
I didn't want to overlook a comment in chat from one of our viewers, Captain Kales, who's Kaylee, my roommate. Hi. She said there's no reason not to be considerate and compassionate towards your fellow
Yep.
players and GM and vice versa. Which kind of is a good segue back into the flip side of my earlier question. As GMs, STs, DMs, somebody running a game runner, creator, we have, I feel, a responsibility to foster a good environment for our players,
Mm-hmm.
but that may not come naturally to people. It may not be something that they've ever run up against. They may have only played with like-minded people, and then they have somebody new that they want to bring in, and that might be a roadblock for some people and how to adapt. um, how would you go about that if this was the situation at your table, or even a friend's table?
So this is a fun one because it does assume that the GM is something different from the other players.
Hmm.
And one of the things I try to push in my safety rules is, as a GM, you have all the same rights and responsibilities as a player. You are allowed to walk away from your table if it becomes weird. You're allowed to call a break. You're allowed to say, hey guys, this isn't working for me. Let's change some things, etc., etc. Now, if you're bringing in a new person, that's great, but you are not solely responsible for the health of your table. If your other players aren't fostering an inclusive environment, and like maybe they're being shitty towards the newbie, sometimes that happens. um maybe that's not really a game you want to continue running, or maybe you do and just that newbie's not a good fit. And also sometimes a newbie can be toxic for the health of the table, and really what it depends on is just be open with your players and be like, hey, what's working here, what's not working here. I'd really like to introduce this person to our table. What do we need, what would we like? Here's what they're thinking about playing. Really just keeping that running dialogue. I know that
Mm-hmm.
sounds like a really easy answer, but it's like any other relationship or friendship or any other social environment. You got to keep that communication going.
And that's probably key, and is going to lead your table or your LARP or whatever to
Yeah.
deteriorate very quickly if you can't have those
Mm.
conversations.
Yeah, I really wish I had a magic bullet for that, but honestly, it is so different from each table to table. Like, there's a couple of LARPs I'm involved with or on the fringes of, and some of the players have really good experiences, and some of the players have had one experience and then are like, I'm out, and are not coming back. And does that necessarily mean that the LARP is bad or that the players are bad? No, sometimes it's just a bad fit. Like,
That's a good test of that. And we were talking about con crud earlier,
yep.
before stream, is cons in general, especially gaming centric cons that invite players to come and sit with creators and developers and play their games.
Mhm.
But it's likely that you're going to be sitting at a table with people you've never met before.
So I have some actually kind of funny stories from Gen Con that illustrate this idea of like communication and needing to have outs, basically. So at Gen Con, for those of you who don't know, you have to pay per game, right? So it's like $2 or $4 per game, which is kind of a problem because if you have a person at your table who is causing a ruckus and like making the game less fun for other players, you can't kick them out.
That would be frustrating.
Yeah, I was running a game of Chill at one point, and at the beginning I had everybody go around the table and introduce themselves with names and pronouns and which character they picked. And I had a guy who was like, "Oh, my name is so and so, and if you can't tell what I am by looking at me, I feel sorry for you." And he
It's a good way
continued.
to ostracize the rest of the people at your table.
Yep. I had that. He basically had this attitude for the rest of the game, and the game was scheduled to run for 3 hours.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, and we had some gender nonconforming people at my table. So basically, what I wound up doing is I wound up shortening the encounter significantly. So it was like an hour and a half instead of 3.
Mm.
And spotlighting the other characters, and like, of course, letting this guy have his hero moments, but not super like, this is your story. I gave business cards to everyone at the table, and everyone was happy with them except this guy who took it and then threw it back at me and left the table. And
Wow.
yeah, that wasn't a commentary on me. I did my best. Like, I was extremely polite to him, as I would be to anyone else at my table, and I explained the safety mechanics, and I was, very open with everybody. And he just decided to be kind of a jerk about it. And I mean, everybody else had fun, which is great, but there are times where you kind of have to not let that fall on you.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like, as a GM, it's so easy to be like, oh my God, I fucked up. I could have brought him into the group more, da 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 da. But that goes back to Geek Social Fallacy 1, which is ostracizers are evil. I wasn't ostracizing him, I was mitigating the damage to the rest of my table.
Right.
Because I was a younger woman-shaped person, and he was an older, man-shaped person in like his 50s or 60s who had basically been playing this game his whole life.
Mm-hmm.
So there wasn't really much I could do to change his mind. I had a similar problem with Bluebeard's Bride, where I had a couple of tone fuckers at my table. Are you familiar with the term tone fucker?
I'm not.
So for those of you playing along at home, tone fucking is when you're trying to play a game of Vampire the Masquerade and somebody is trying to play the My Little Pony RPG in the middle of it.
Okay.
It's pretty self-explanatory, but I was running Bluebeard's Bride, which is this very like grim, dark, feminine horror game. And one of the things the players do at the beginning of the game is, what gift are you giving to Bluebeard on your wedding day?
Mm-hmm.
And what did Bluebeard do that won you over? And 2 of my players were like, yeah, he did like a pop and squat and that won me over, and I gave him like energy drinks for our wedding. And that was another game where I sort of had to, end it in about half the time because they weren't buying in. And that's such a huge thing, both about consent and about gaming in general, is you have to be able to buy into what's happening, whether it is people being allowed to say yes and no, or hey, we're all going to have a horror experience together, or hey, we're going to do a big old hack and slash. Like, if everybody's not on the same page, there's very little you can do to fix that if people don't want to be on the same page.
Right.
And sometimes, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, from the DM seat or the ST seat, if the rest of your table is taking something in one direction, it can become you against them.
Yeah.
And that can be really tough in trying to get them back on track, or getting them back into a quote unquote positive place, depending on how positive you can get and what you're playing. But sometimes it's like a never ending battle. So they're just running away with something negative, and you're like, oh guys, this is not what I wanted.
Yeah, and sometimes you just have to be like, look guys, this went really off the rails and I'm not sure how to fix it. Can we, pause here and we'll wait until next session? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay to do that. And so many GMs feel like they've failed when they've done that. And babies, you haven't failed, I promise you. It's okay. Sometimes fellow players do things like this. It's something that happens because we're all human. Being in large groups of humans, or even small groups of humans, is gonna come with risks. Part of the reason I write safety techniques, part of the reason I try and codify safety into games, even on a very basic level, is just so, we can mitigate some of those risks. It's not going to remove it entirely. There's always going to be someone who thinks they can manipulate it to their advantage. There's always going to be someone who's going to try and misuse it, or someone who stumbles. But at the end of the day, the idea is to write in that culture of safety, that culture of saying, yes, we are allowed to say no to things, but we're allowed to say yes to things too. We're allowed to want things and we're allowed to not want things. And nobody should ever have to give up their own agency to be in a game that is supposedly about having agency that you do not have in real life.
So that is kind of a good segue into a question that I had that I wanted to bring up with you. Oh, TR malfunction.
Yeah, TR malfunction. It's fine. It's fine.
So how do we as players, how do we separate ourselves from our trauma?
Ooh.
When it comes to our characters that we're playing? And also there's props for the tiara in the chat if you hadn't seen that.
If you guys want these, by the way, the 5 wits are selling them for $30 a piece, and they're rhinestone and crystal. And they're
very
great.
Sparkly.
Yes, I love it. Anyway, so that's fascinating that you ask, how can we separate ourselves from our trauma? Because I'm sure there are people who can do that. I am not one of them. My trauma is something that has shaped who I am as a person. And it can be really, really hard for me to go, oh, we're having a scene about, I don't know, being stuck at customs while a visa agent denies your visa because the person who shipped you to another country committed visa fraud. Yes, this is something that's actually happened to me.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Having that scene is gonna be really difficult for me. And it's okay that that's difficult for me, because that's a really fucking difficult situation.
Yeah.
The trick is, and separating, I guess, I think more what I do is I sort of ground myself rather than thinking it as separating myself from my trauma. And a lot of that has to do with out of game resources, right? Because someone who can't manage their trauma is somebody who you might have a difficult time gaming with. And I know sometimes when I am activated, which is my favorite phrase now that I've discovered it, a friend of mine uses it instead of triggered.
I love it.
Triggered is still a great phrase. It describes something much less violent and much more embodied, which I
And
think is very
triggered has empowered people lately to take advantage of it and spin it into their own narrative
yeah.
and use it against people that are experiencing those moments.
Yes.
Sorry,
No,
minor
you're good.
derailments.
No, that's a very good note. I mean, triggering has been used as an insult, as we've all seen. And it's extremely easy to just be like, ha, you're triggered. And it's very hard to explain to somebody what that feels like. But I think activation is my personal favorite phrase right now because it refers to something ongoing and it is less violent. And it's really hard to be like, ha, you're activated. Meh. It just doesn't sound as good.
And while she grabs a sip of water, I feel like we should have thrown up a kind of a disclaimer before we started our stream that some of these topics might be a little bit sensitive for people that are tuning in. So if you're just joining us now or you have been listening in, I'm sure you've caught on to that. First, thank you. Yes. But yeah, some of these topics might be a little sensitive. So we're just chatting about it to bring some more awareness and development around them.
Sadly, as somebody with trauma, I am also someone with ADHD. So sometimes I'll be like, oh, yeah, this is a thing about trauma I want to talk about. And then I'll go off. Then that happens. And sometimes people have to be like, hey, Jax. I'm like, oh, shit, sorry. Ian knows nothing about this if he's still in the chat. Hi, Ian. But yeah, so a lot of sort of playing safely with trauma is having having a community that you can trust to handle that. People who aren't going to be like, whoa, why are you feeling upset about this? It's just a game. Don't you know the difference between pretend and reality? Which I fucking hate, but whatever. It's fine. But the other thing is trauma is very much a self-healing process, but it's also a communal healing process, right? So it's very weird to me how there are these two conceptualizations of healing from trauma. One is your community has to take care of you, and one is it is your responsibility to heal yourself. And very few people realize that these are not mutually exclusive. Like, yes, you should go to therapy. You should practice grounding techniques. You should be able to realize when, oh, hey, my body feels like it's been shot into outer space and all I'm hearing in my head are machine noises. And maybe something's wrong and maybe I need to take a minute to sit with that, which is sort of my experience with body flashbacks. But being able to sit with that, just even being able to be like, oh, hey, suddenly my brain has decided we're on fire. Oops. And just being able to kind of be like, hey guys, I'm gonna go take a bathroom break, or I'm gonna go walk around the house once, or I'm gonna go wash my hands, or something like that, has been really helpful to me, both as a player and a GM. Because even in the middle of a game, if you're activated, you got to deal with that. It's just a fact of existing in a traumatized body mind.
Mm-hmm.
And it is not something that I, as one traumatized person writing safety rules for millions of people, can say definitively, oh yes, you personally should do this, this, and this in order to successfully manage your trauma while gaming. The only thing I can do is be like, hey, here's generally how you foster a culture of consent and generosity and gentleness at your table.
Right. It's not a WikiHow on how to.
Oh God, I wish it was.
Wouldn't it be that easy, complete with pictures and diagrams?
Here is how you hold traumatized friend gently like burger.
Wrap in blanket.
Yes. Wrap traumatized friend gently in blanket like burrito. Ask if they would like lettuce. But
Lettuce on
yes,
your burrito?
I'm a burger
Oh, we're gonna
burrito
have a
baby.
whole
I'm that
other conversation.
nowadays.
Corinne would very much like the weird WikiHow illustrations for some.
Yeah. I'm sure I have a really wonderful artist from NYU who I'm sure could do that. I'm very excited because she just did all of my art assets for my new LARP company because I have my own LARP LLC now. It's
You
very
should
exciting.
absolutely plug that and tell us all about it.
I will.
All right.
I will do this after I'm finished bubbling about trauma and gaming though.
Okay.
So something that is very cool about gaming and trauma, and I just want to put this note here before I continue because some people are going to take what I say as an excuse to do gaming instead of therapy and not tell the people around them. Don't do that. But trauma is very specifically a form of chemical storytelling. The way the trauma is stored in the brain is it's actually stored in the limbic system, which is down here somewhere. And it's stored as an emotional response instead of a memory. So every time something that reminds you of that trauma comes up, your nervous system activates. That's why we get flashbacks. That's why there's this really cool, vagus nerve theory of trauma that actually locates the trauma in your body down your vagus nerve. But trauma is an embodied story. It is that feeling, it is that emotion, it is always static, it is always the same thing. It never changes like a memory. However, being able to tell stories with that trauma is something that is therapeutically recognized as being able to integrate the trauma or turn it into an actual memory instead of a limbic memory.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to play something like Bluebeard's Bride, like Quietus, like 10 Candles, and being able to say, okay, I'm a sexual assault survivor. I would like my character to go through sexual assault scenarios where I get to change the ending, right?
Yeah.
Then actually has this tiny little shift in your trauma memory of, oh hey, maybe this wasn't my fault. Maybe this is something I can handle in the future. And it's actually a very small step towards healing, that being able to take agency over your own story. When I was in a game run by my friend Dave, something I very specifically asked of him and asked of my fellow players is, okay, so we're playing high school kids.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents were emotionally abusive during my middle school and high school years. I would like to play someone with an emotionally abusive mother and who has to sort of work around that and overcome that. Is everybody okay with that? And that is something I had an ongoing dialogue with the people at my table about. And it worked out really well because these were all A, people who knew me, and B, understood the need to work through that story. And just kind of being open about, hey guys, I would really like to address this part of my trauma in this game.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be okay? And then discussing with your table how you can do that is awesome. Um, One of my favorite safety techniques for this reason is lines and veils by Ron Edwards, because lines are things that are never addressed ever. They just don't exist in the world. And veils are things that exist in the world but are addressed off screen.
Okay.
So some very common lines are like pedophilia, graphic animal death, blah, blah, blah. Some very common veils are intense romantic scenes, harm of children, tryptophobic imagery. I don't know. Like, I always put tryptophobic imagery in as a hard line because it's just not something I can deal with without wanting to scratch my fucking skin off.
Understandable.
um, but lines and veils has been super helpful for me as both a partner and parental abuse survivor. because maybe I don't want to deal with somebody calling me ungrateful to my face at the table. Ungrateful is one of my trigger words.
Mhm.
But maybe I want to have it insinuated that when my character went to dinner with her mother said something about her being ungrateful, and that is now something she has to deal with.
Okay.
So yeah, more sort of practicing the techniques at the table to be able to deal with that trauma in a safe environment. And this is, I guess, one of my other sort of big pillar beliefs is uh, gaming should be a low consequence environment for high stakes emotions.
Okay.
And in order to create a low consequence environment, you have to create an environment where people are like, hey, I might get hurt, but if I get hurt, I'm gonna, let people know I'm hurt, and other people are gonna be like, oh crap, we hurt you, let's address that. Or, hey, we know something like this might hurt you, let's avoid that, or let's address it in a way that is healthy and safe for everybody involved.
Yeah, and establishing that at the start of a new campaign, a new LARP, a new whatever the case may be, is super important. So everybody, it may not ever come up during the game, but it's important, in my opinion, to give players and GMs alike the tools to deal with that if
Yep.
it does ever come up. Um, I lost my train of thought.
It's okay. Something I am actually really proud of I think it was my V8 V8. No, V8 is what I drink. My V5 safety rules is I included a section on when GMs can say no and when players can say no.
Mhm.
I'm like, here is a list of reasons why you could say no to something. Also, at the end of that list of reasons is because you feel uncomfortable and you want to say no.
It's true.
Yeah.
You
And
don't
so many
necessarily
people
need a reason.
yeah. It's so wild to me because I know so many people who stay in like vampire LARPs or campaign buffer LARPs or whatever because that's where all their friends are,
Mhm.
not because they enjoy it. And that freaks me the fuck out. I'm not gonna lie to you. Like, that is the single because I used to be one of those people, and being in that mindset is fucking terrifying.
Yeah. And I think a lot of marginalized people have been conditioned that they can't say no to
Yep.
anything,
Uh-huh.
and they have to just be there to please the people that they care about. And this is even true of myself. Saying no and dealing with the potential repercussions of that is more terrifying to me than sitting there and enduring.
Yep. It's also fascinating that you mention it. And I'm really sorry to be like, but what about the men here? But it's also an important note for dudes too. It's real hard for dudes to say no during games because if they don't, they're a pussy.
Yeah.
And men are only allowed to feel three emotions in my experience: pride, anger, or desire. And it doesn't matter what the desire is for, they're just allowed to want something. But discomfort is not an emotion men are allowed to feel under patriarchy.
And if they are, it opens them up to the scrutiny of not
Yep.
only their peers as men, but peers of other people that have these gender roles ingrained in their head of what a man is supposed to be and how are they supposed to act, and
Yep.
what they're how they're supposed to react in certain situations.
Yep. So the idea that we're not allowed to say no fucks up everyone, really. And it is such a patriarchal idea, even though men suffer under it, because the men who don't suffer under it are the ones who got fucked up enough that they realized that they just needed to be the people to whom nobody could say no, if that makes sense.
Um, right. So kind of at the top of
Yeah, they had to be on the
the
top.
ladder, and
Hmm. Yep.
so we've mentioned a little bit some of the games that you have worked on, and a lot of them are in these, for lack of a better term, fantastical or fictional settings.
Yep.
as a player or somebody that's experiencing these worlds, how do we separate the trauma that those, or even just process, not even have to separate it, but how do we process the trauma that those players and those characters rather are experiencing, um, for things that don't exist in the real world, like
That's a fun one.
a post-apocalyptic situation. Not saying that that couldn't happen, because it might, but like a steampunk type setting or a high fantasy type setting. These things, to the best of our knowledge, don't exist. And it's not to say that those characters can't experience trauma, but I know that, and again, I have to use personal anecdotes, but my vampire characters have been through some shit.
Yeah,
Been
that
through some
happens.
shit. And it's hard to think about that when the session ends, and it's kind of scary sometimes.
Yeah. So I am going to ask for a little bit of a clarification on your
Sure.
question.
Mhm.
Are you looking for ways to sort of disengage from the character, or are you looking to talk about sort of real world traumatic analogs in fantasy worlds? Because I have answers for both of those.
So I think for most of the people that are watching right now, and just the um maybe people that are just getting into gaming of whatever variety, disengaging from those settings is going to be the most important.
Yes. Okay, I love de-rolling. De-rolling and debriefing, ever since I discovered them a couple years ago, are some of my favorite tools. And this will be a little different for every game, and some people like to use scripts and some people don't. But I will give you my version, which is at the end of a game, everybody takes a deep breath in and then lets it out. And then maybe we do it again. And then we ask the person next to us for a hug or a fist bump.
I love it.
And then you just start asking questions. It is very super tempting to go into war stories, which are like, then my character did this and it was super cool, which can actually be really useful for certain kinds of de-rolling, and is a question I really like to ask is, what is something cool you did and something cool someone else did, right? Because it allows you to sort of give those shout outs. But I've also heard other questions like, what is something you want to take with you from this character? Like, do you want to take their bravery? Do you want to take their lack of imposter syndrome? Do you want to take their kindness? Whatever. What's something you want to leave behind? Do you want to leave behind their impulsivity, their foolishness, their shallowness, whatever? But asking those questions that really sort of get your players to answer in third person, like, oh, my character did this instead of I did this.
Hmm.
And talking more in that space sort of allows you to separate, and it allows you to separate, but it also allows you to integrate in a healthy way. Like, wow, I just had this really emotional experience, and that's super valid. But also, it didn't happen. It happened only partially to me. It also happened to this character. So, like, people may hate my character and they don't want to talk to them, but that was because my friends and I were playing in a scenario that we agreed that this was going to happen. And if you and your friends didn't agree this was going to happen and you felt really bullied, well, maybe that's something to talk to your friends about. But but yeah, being able to put that distance between you and your character is a really, for me, a really great way to sort of deal with post game emotions.
That's really great, and I hope more people incorporate that. I feel like that would be especially crucial in like a LARP type situation, because you're physically there experiencing it.
Yep.
Um,
LARPs also, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you here
no, go
real
ahead.
quick. LARPs also introduced the concept of bleed, which
Okay.
is your character is feeling this emotion and then oops, suddenly you're feeling this emotion,
Hmm.
like for realsies.
Oopsies.
Yeah, and that's called bleed out, and bleed in is when you come to game feeling an emotion and then that emotion bleeds into your character. So
Okay.
there's a couple of different ways it can work out. But I find the concept of bleed super helpful because I know some people who don't experience it and some people who do experience it. and being able to care for those people in different ways has really helped me as a game designer, because being able to have those sort of different questions, like what's something cool you did, and also what's something you want to take with you from your character, both address different types of players, and they could choose whether to answer them or not.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to touch on LARPs because I know I have gathered they are very near and dear to your heart. And while we're kind of diving into this, because I know we're butting up against time here,
Mhm.
I want to invite any questions in the chat and I'll pass those along as they come in.
Fast,
But
fast.
on the topic of LARPs, do you find that there is something different? Do you have to shift your mindset when it comes to a LARP opposed to like a tabletop game? Do you prefer LARPs over tabletop gaming? It's okay if you
So,
do. There's always a favorite.
so it's interesting because um I find I play less as I design more, which is a fault on my part, and I really should, get back. I do self-publish a lot of LARPs. A lot of my tabletop work is through other companies, and I'm actually pretty happy with that arrangement. Um, I like tabletops a lot for the fact that they don't require a budget. And there's so much you can do with them, and there's so many beautiful tabletops coming out. But I also really enjoy LARPs because trauma, as we were talking about earlier, is very much a full body experience.
Hmm.
So being able to sort of involve my body and move my body and express emotion with not just my voice, but also, my arms and my legs and whatever, is a very intensely moving experience for me. So, no, I don't actually particularly like one better than the other, even though people are like, Jax, you're a LARP designer. And I'm like, I also design tabletops. And some people are like, Jax, you're a tabletop designer. I'm like, I have also won awards for my LARPs. What is your point? It's very odd to me that people want to sort of force this dichotomy, because they do, in a lot of ways, flow into each other.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm just kind of like, yeah, I like gaming. I like analog gaming. It's very exciting. I
It is
love
very
it.
exciting.
Yeah.
It's immersive and
Oh yeah.
it's a disconnect from all of the technology that we're surrounded with and bombarded with, quite frankly, all day, every day. Sometimes you just need a break, man.
I mean, it's what's interesting is there are actually now LARPs that incorporate Discord as a remote play experience,
Oh, that's so cool.
which is super cool. Yeah, I'm currently in one called Archangel Frame, which is sort of Evangelion but make it more Catholic.
Oh, well.
I mean more of the actual deep Catholic mysticism and less of the American Catholic rah rah pro life nonsense. Um, I'm a lax Catholic, in case you can't tell. But it's really good. I actually kind of prefer the remote play experience for reasons. Um,
For
but like,
accessibility reasons, it's
oh yeah,
huge. Yeah.
yeah, it costs less money. Like it allows me, because it's a very emotionally intense game. Same hashtag
Same.
same. Um, but it's cheaper, it's more accessible. Archangel Frame is an extremely emotional game by design. So being able to sort of like, oh wow, this is getting to be a little too much for me. Let me step away from my computer for a minute,
Yeah.
is awesome.
So I do want to ask the question that came up in the chat, but while we're on the topic of LARPs that you design specifically,
Mhm.
I may have been creeping your website and came
Yeah.
across White Wedding and
Oh
was
yeah.
super intrigued by it. Can you share with that
Oh my
share
gosh.
about what that's
Okay.
about?
So, for whatever reason, it's probably because I'm a lapsed Catholic. Ghosts are weird, and I love them. And I had so here's a secret about my LARPs: is half of them are based on dreams that I have, and are like, this is weird. I want to turn it into a game.
Perfect.
But I had this game about. I had this dream rather. Freudian slip. Thank you. I had this dream about this wedding where the issue in the vows was "till death do us part." One of the people getting married was a ghost.
That would be a problem.
Yeah, and I'm like, wow, wouldn't that be super cool if I wrote that into a LARP and some of the invitees are ghosts and some of them are alive, and like I have I have the main ghost who is getting married to the human intended fiance, whatever. I called them pre-spouses in the first draft because I couldn't think of a gender neutral term.
Pre-spouses.
Pre-spouses. So I'm
We're
like,
pre-spoused.
yes, they were pre-spoused. I think I either wound up calling them betrothed or intended.
Mm.
But the ghost intended has a living partner who misses them very dearly. But since their vows were till death do us part, and there's also a similar situation with a ghost who is related to one of the intended, who is now in a polyamorous relationship beyond the grave. And their
Okay.
alive lovers still very much stuck on them, and they meet at the wedding. My, isn't that awkward? I mean, I also have like the various wedding stereotypes, like the big hat lady who is commenting on everyone.
She
And
would.
yeah, I think I have the best ghost and the human of honor.
Wow, I love it.
I love them. They're great. No, sorry, the chief human and the best ghost. Because I was looking up all of these gender neutral wedding terms and I'm like, I love these. But yes, that is White Wedding. And Ian, thank you for pointing it out in the chat, actually gave me the title because occasionally I'll go to Ian and be like, Ian, I am struggling with this LARP idea. And Ian will go, have you considered this pun? And I'll go, shit.
Or this very catchy song title.
Yep. Now, that game was actually laid out for me by Meredith Gerber, who's the other community manager for Onyx Path. And it's really cool because she laid them out like little, she laid the character sheets out because the character sheets are the size of a note card. She laid them out like place settings at a wedding.
Adorable.
So it's like a little tent. So it's got the name on one side and your character sheet on the other.
Admittedly, I have never played in a LARP, but I would 10/10 play in that one.
Hell yeah! I'll run it in midwinter next year. You can come play.
Yes.
Good.
All right. So to get into questions, we had a question in the chat. If you had to pick one, what is your current favorite project you've worked on?
Oh no.
We won't tell the others, we promise.
Okay. This is terrible, and I don't want to sound like one of those writers, but I have literally worked on every single one of my dream projects basically as soon as I said they were my dream projects. I am extremely lucky as a freelancer.
Just manifested that shit into reality. That's
I
amazing.
sure did. Literally. So like I originally, God bless her, Danielle Lausen Harper is the person who brought me on to my first Onyx Path project after I met her at an Onyx Path dinner. And I was like, hey, I am marginalized and mentally ill. You should hire me. And she's like, that's great, but can you string 5 words together? And I said, I can string together 7. I'll even put in proper punctuation. And so I actually sent her a writing sample, and she pulled me on to what was it? Half Damned, which was the Ghouls, Revenants, and Dhampir book for Requiem 2nd edition. I did Ghouls. I'm very proud of them. And I was like, oh, it's a shame that Changeling has already been developed because Changeling the Lost is the game that saved my life in a very real way. Because, spoiler alert, when you're raised in an abusive household, you don't realize you're abused until you're out of it. And seeing the true Fae in Changing the Lost, 1st edition, was like, oh fuck, okay, I need therapy. Literally, that's how it went. It was great. And so I was like, oh, it's such a shame that Changeling has already been developed. And not a month after I send in my first draft for Half Damned, I get a message from Rose Bailey saying, "Hey, are you available to work on Changeling the Lost second edition?" I'm like, boy, howdy am I. So I wrote the kits for that and also the safety rules for that. And that was actually the first Onyx Path book to have safety rules. I'm extremely happy about that. I don't remember if I wrote about session 0 in that one. I'm going to do a side tangent real quick. I'm sorry.
Sure.
So session 0, for those of you who are not familiar, is your first session. And by first session, I mean you get all your players together at someone's house and you're like, hey, here's the game we want to run. Let's talk about expectations. Because expectation management is important when you're meeting with a group of humans several times.
Right.
And
With
it's
many different
amazing.
personalities.
Yeah. It's amazing how much better a game with session 0 is than a game without. Like, I'm not saying a game can't be good without session 0, but I find it is so much better for my games if I have a session 0.
Mm-hmm. And we employ the same with our games too. We find them very successful.
They're so good. I've also seen them done really well with Gehenna Gaming and with Red Moon Role Playing, and I'm so happy it's becoming a more widespread thing because it's just it's such a good common sense thing. Anyway, where was I going with that? Oh yes. And I was like, gosh, I'd really like to work on Exalted. Hey Jax, you want to work on Exalted? Okay. Satiros Phil Brucato was like, hey, if you could work on any game, what would it be? And I made a list in his thread. And one of those is Fading Suns. And Bill Bridges showed up and was like, hey, Jax, we're doing a new edition of Fading Suns. Do you want to write the nobles? And I went, okay, great. I love nobility. Matthew Dawkins, who you interviewed a while ago, who is lovely, and I owe him so fucking much. Was on the Ghoul chapter of Half Damned with me and was working on Cult Divinity Lost at the time, and I was so happy that there was going to be another edition of Cult because Cult is an amazing game, and even with its weird 90s splatterpunk roots, it's just so weirdly deep in a lot of ways. And Matthew Dawkins was like, hey, let me introduce you to the guy who's developing Cult. And I had actually sent him an email a year earlier being like, hey, I have some ideas for this. And we sort of lost contact. But then he was like, hey, why don't you write a scenario for Cult? I'm like, sweet, I will do that. And then the 2016 election happened. And I'm like, hey, I'm really distraught by this. Can I write a second scenario where Trump is a literal child-eating demon? Yeah, sure. And that's how the Rocket's Red Glare was born. So, this is just a really long way of saying that I'm really happy with all of the projects I've written on. Probably the one I'm most proud of right now, which is probably the easiest way to do this, is so I'm obsessed with Nefandi. I love Nefandi from Mage the Ascension so much. They're so deeply interesting and heart-wrenching for me. And I could go on about them all night, but I won't. I'm sure Ian would be happy to summarize my rants about Nefandi in the chat, because he's heard me do this before. But Satiros was not going to let anybody else on the Nefandi book, and all of my opinions about Satiros aside, because he is, as one might say, a controversial figure. He is very protective of things he thinks other people won't do well. And I'm like, okay, Nefandi are abusers in a lot of ways, and it's very easy to do that wrong. And he actually saw my safety work for Cult, and unfortunately, that hasn't been published yet. That was supposed to be for the Detroit source book, and it's getting moved to the Player's Guide, which is fine, because it means it's going to be in a slightly more core source book. But he's like, yeah, I need you to be on Nefandi. I'm like, okay. I wound up writing 10,000 words for it. I wrote Dancing on the Knife's Edge, which is the safety section. And I wrote all of the NPC Nefandi. And it's a very short section of the book, but I am honestly super proud of it because my name is the only other name listed on that book as an author. And people have been calling it my book. And I'm really happy with that because I care so much about my tiny stunted soul children. And like they're very, I don't know. I don't usually empathize with groups that are like, I am extremely evil and evil is my bag. But there is something about being a trauma survivor and specific parts of your trauma being people just repeatedly telling you you're evil. And then all of a sudden you just go, fuck it, I'm evil. Yeah.
May as well. Everybody thinks I am anyhow.
Yep. Yeah.
Well,
So
that's amazing. We'll have to keep an eye out for that.
it is actually out on Drive-Thru RPG now.
Okay.
You should. It is called The Book of the Fallen for Mage the Ascension 20th edition.
If someone could
very,
drop
very
a
good.
link in the chat, that would be very appreciated.
I will do that right now.
Not you.
I'm gonna do it.
All right, you good.
I'm helping.
If
I'm
anyone
here
has,
to help.
thank you, I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
If anyone has any other questions that you want to drop before we wrap up for the night, and I'm gonna because I want to kind of steer it back into something positive. I like asking people one thing that they want to rant about quickly, but then leaving it on one thing that they want to rave about, because I love hearing what people are proud of, what they're proud of other people that are doing, projects they're working on. I just want to put more positive stuff out there into our little internet culture.
I love that. So actually, I recently submitted a game to the Fraudulent Gaze Jam
Okay.
on EGO. And this was actually a really wonderful game jam born out of people saying, oh, well, you're not the right kind of gay, right? But I wrote a game and it's in a bundle that donates to queer charities.
That's a good cause.
Yes. And the game is, let me actually link to the bundle while I'm thinking about it. But the game itself is called Cake by the Ocean. Yes, it is based off of that song. And it is all about having possibly ill-advised and spontaneous sex on spring break. And the sex mechanic is sharing a piece of cake.
Okay, I'm into it.
Yeah. And like
seems incredibly wholesome.
Yeah.
And delicious.
Obviously, if you're sitting there and, eating cake quietly and politely together, maybe you're having kind of a shy encounter, but you're like smashing cake in each other's faces and being all over each other, and that's probably a little more intense. Yeah. Also, Ian points out that he and I have not yet had the opportunity to write a Planescape book. And that is probably the last big void in my life because I love Planescape. Like, if I ever found a GM to run Planescape for me in the way I want it to be run, I would die happy because one of the things I love about Planescape is it is this beautiful, enriched D&D setting where there is actually so much non-combat stuff you can do. And it's just, I really want to have a Planescape game that feels like a Planescape game.
Yeah. And that sounds like something that would attract me because I am very much into more of the role play and sandbox aspects of tabletops than like heavy combat stuff. But that's just me.
Oh, big same. And
so
like,
go ahead.
No.
I was going to segue into your LARP so we could shill that. If you want, you can share what you want about it.
Okay. I will real quick link to my LARP LLC right now. So I actually publish LARPs under.
Sorry, I was laughing at Travis and his comment on his copious amounts of free time.
Yeah.
Which I think we all know is a damn lie.
His damn lies and statistics. Let me see if I can share this page. I just want to copy the link to my Facebook page. I will. Here we go. See if that works. So
Yep.
this is LARP LLC. This is just my production company because I'm actually looking at producing weekend and one-shot LARPs.
Okay.
And this is my itch.io page, which actually has all of my LARPs for sale. It has some weird experimental games. It has some more straightforward games. It has a game called Send Nudes, where you're the staff at a cyberpunk ramen
I
restaurant.
heard you talk about this on the Onyx Pathcast. And
Yeah.
I like busted out laughing.
Well, you can get that one for free or pay what you want. It's super fun. It's really easy to set up.
Sorry, I interrupted you with my excitement.
No, you're good.
If
I
you
like
want to share with the rest of that
excitement.
what the game is.
Yeah, so Send Nudes is very specifically just you are either cyberpunk stereotypes coming into sort of a low rent ramen shop, or you're the staff of said low rent ramen shop. And it's lunch rush. That's happening. It gets really wacky really fast and it's really fun. Ian wants to shill us and them, and he designed a wonderful cover for it. There was this period of time, I think in 2018, where I was just obsessed with the movie Bird Box.
Yeah.
I loved it. I had full Twitter analysis threads of it and comparing it to A Quiet Place and Annihilation and a couple of other sort of weird horror movies. And so I wrote this game called Us and Them, where you are marginalized people or disabled people who live in symbiosis with the monsters, whatever the monsters are. I think I lean specifically more towards Bird Box, where the idea is that the monster is what you fear most.
Okay.
And the reason these people are able to live in symbiosis with the monsters is because they've already seen their worst fear. And it's already happened to them. And so these monsters don't have that sort of weird suicidal power that they do over the more traditionally healthy people in Bird Box. Like, so the thing that got me about Bird Box is that there's this whole thing about how, oh, crazy people escape from an insane asylum and they're working with the monsters and blah, 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 blah. And like, I hated that part. But also, I really loved the idea of those of us with trauma being able to survive these monsters and even live in communities with them. Because you can't have these, violent, unhinged raiders without having places for them to come back to.
Right.
So I really wanted to explore that aspect with that game.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all that. I'm glad that you have some things that we can look forward to and that you're looking forward to.
Oh, I do have one more game I want to shill, and I think
yeah,
you'll like it a lot.
absolutely.
It's called Pounded in the Butt by a Micro Game.
I'm sorry, what?
It's a Chuck Tingle speed dating LARP.
It's a what, lady? You cut out. I'm sorry.
It's a Chuck Tingle speed dating LARP.
I love it already.
That is another thing you can get on my website. So I wanted to end that on a slightly more positive note.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
And for those that aren't already following her, she's at Rufflejacks on Twitter. I highly recommend it. You won't be disappointed. There's great conversations there. And they're, apart from the hype for Animal Crossing, which I personally subscribe to, and I'm very excited for that. There's some really good conversations, some really thoughtful stuff that she puts up there. So definitely worth a follow.
Also, I've been really enjoying following Heather. So,
I post
if you're not
gifts.
already following.
I'd like
I
to
also
say that
post a lot of
Heather's
our
great.
stuff that we do here on Roll the Roll and a
So, you know.
community that I'm a part of. I am going to follow up our interview and our chat here tonight with a little article that I'll share out. That'll have a lot of links to Jax's work and where you can find her, and just a recap of some of the topics that we talked about today. So I'll share that out for everyone. Anything else that you want to shill or share before we go?
No, I'm good for the moment. Thank you so much for having me. This has been a delight.
Well, thanks for sitting and chatting with us. I know it's late for you. It is a work night.
Yeah.
And it's
I'm just
been
sorry you had to catch me with my ADHD rambling.
no, it's perfect. So I sat down with this with literally like just a couple little notes, and I knew that I just wanted to kind of explore your thoughts on these topics because I think they're important.
Yep.
I think that we could all do with some more education around making those that we interact with on a day-to-day basis more comfortable and being more receptive to their experience so they can experience us in a more positive way.
Yes,
So
that is a great way of putting it.
well,
And
thank
I'd
you
like to
again.
say thank you both.
Awesome,
I'm here.
man.
I want to
And
say
then
thank you both for all this. Now go ahead, Heather.
and then if you want to join us back here, roll the roll. I think our next stream game is on Friday.
Friday.
Right?
Yes,
Okay.
we'll be streaming at I believe 9 Central Standard Time on Friday. We're going a little bit later, seeing if that start works better. Or no, correction. 8 Central Standard Time. No, 8:30? No. Bevan is saying 8:30. 8:30 Central Standard Time. I am the worst. I apologize. Uh
Same time. Same time.
Yes, same time as this on Friday. We're playing Monster of the Week, and it's a very fun game. And yeah, I'd say follow both Heather and Jax. They are great. And finally, I think we are going to raid Psyche Siren, who is a therapist by day and streamer by
Woo!
night. She's great, so if you don't follow her, stick around and you'll get to meet her. But yeah, did any closing words, you two?
Let me demonstrate. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, you go first.
And I was going to say, check out our friends at Onyx Path. If you are not familiar with them, we have been playing a lot of their games and we have been spending a lot of time with the folks over there, chatting with them, and they're amazing. They're putting on really great content, like amazing content in the tabletop world. And they're, from a personal standpoint, because I've covered a few of them, their Kickstarter game is fucking strong. It's like amazing how well they can put together a Kickstarter and just like crush it. But check them out. They have all the socials everywhere. We frequently make fun of what is an Onyx Path and how to rock one. And
Yeah,
will that question ever be answered?
we constantly make bad Onyx Path puns. And I would like to say thank you for the bits. We appreciate it.
Yes,
Yay! The
Thank
bits.
you.
The bits. The
Give us
bits.
the bits. Alrighty, thank you everybody. Jax, did you have anything to say?
Yes, I would like to demonstrate a D roll really quick.
Yes.
So, I have been Jax. You can find me at RuffleJax. You can find me at RuffleJax on Twitter, on Instagram. You can find me at Jacqueline Bryk Design. I am a designer. I am a writer. I am also a very tired person who needs to go to bed. And see, now that I have taken off my crown, I am taking off the role of the competent designer and going into the role of the very tired 27-year-old. So thank you so much for letting me put on this hat, and I will catch you guys soon.
Thank you so much. Have a good
Thank
night,
you.
everyone.
Goodbye, everyone. We are going to raid, #raid the roll, and I hope you all have a lovely night. Thank you for joining us.
Bye.